And it's also been rewritten, like with the Unsung Founders Monument, where you kind of hide reality. Near where I'm standing now, there was a male basketball player balancing a basketball on one finger with a book under his hand. And next to him was an Asian woman playing a violin. So the one black man was an athlete in 1990, and the one Asian woman was a violinist, and the one black woman is carrying a book on her head. The only person reading a book in the whole statue is a white man, and he's reading it to a white woman who is tempting him with an apple. So, as you might imagine, when we were at the Unsung Founders Monument, I told you that it appeared, but it didn't appear, it was dedicated. This statue was never dedicated. It appeared kind of mysteriously in front of Davis Library, and the artist never came back. She issued press releases about how it wasn't supposed to be stereotypical. If you're interested in this statue, and the reason I feel I can kind of go by quickly, all of the documents related to this in the Chancellor's paper have been digitized. So you can read the story from beginning to end. And it is quite fascinating about how this became poison, and the university departments didn't want to be associated with it. It also became a discussion of free speech and artistic expression. But the broader issue, who would have thought this was a good idea in 1990 to have the student body be a black basketball player, a black woman with a book on her head, an Asian woman with a violin, and a white woman tempting a white man with an apple while he's got his hand on her butt. She's also wearing a wedding ring and he's not. And the fact that the artist said, and you can read the artist's notes, they're digitized, it was not intended to be stereotypical, but to in fact represent the student body is even more problematic. In terms of Floyd McKissick, right, who we talked about over there, as I was doing my research on this part of my project, I was going through the Chancellor's records, and I just happened to think, why not look at what Student Affairs was dealing with at the time? Because I was trying to figure out, this created a lot of ruckus. The Black student movement had a study-in around the statue, which I thought was a great response. Instead of balancing books and basketballs, you were reading books. Another group of students created an organization called CHAOS, Community Against Offensive Statues. I love that, because how specific can you get? You know, they just thought there's a fun name. But I wondered what else was going on with the students, and I had completely forgotten, even though it was in the news at the time. This was when Harvey Gantt was running against Jesse Helms, right? Jesse Helms, who, if you know Strom Thurmond, he was a lot like Strom Thurmond, except he didn't have children with black women, which I think is an interesting thing. But Jesse Helms was running against Harvey Gantt. Harvey Gantt was the first black graduate of Clemson University. He was an architect. He was the mayor of Charlotte, and he worked with Floyd McKissick in developing Soul City. Right, so he was an architect of broader black perspectives in North Carolina. And that campaign led to one of the most famous political ads in the history of American political ads, which is a white hand crumpling a rejection letter, talking about if Harvey Gantt's elected, it's going to be quotas and you're not going to get a job. It was a really, really ugly, racialized campaign, and it played out on this campus. In the student affairs records of the period, this went in October of 1990. The election, of course, was in November. Black students who had Harvey Gantt posters reported having the posters defaced, having racial, rude terms written on their doors. Flyers were set on fire. So there was a lot of public racial antipathy going on the campus, and then this statue dropped into. So I believe it had a broader effect than it might have had it just happened at some other time. So when you have more time, you can look at it. If you Google the student body UNC, you can find an image of what it looked like with the basketball player. Yes? Well, that's often a part of. According to university sources, the statues were not officially removed, but apparently they also weren't stolen because no insurance was ever filed. I didn't tell you this. When we go this way, we're going to pass the site where it was originally installed. And if you've been around the campus a while, there was this planter in front of Davis Library that was always empty or full of dead plants. It's because it wasn't built to be a planter, it was built to hold a statue and didn't have drainage. It finally has drainage, but it still kills plants. It's a sign. But over Christmas break of 1990, right after the statue was installed, the basketball player was knocked basically horizontal and his basketball stolen. The university, and it's all in the archives, paid to have him recast with his basketball and straightened up. And then he and the rest of them were moved here. If you look in there, you'll see the bolt and the plate for him and the Asian woman. When exactly they disappeared is not officially recorded, and where they ended up is not officially recorded. So that is the answer. I used to think they were in a fraternity house. Who commissioned? The class of 1985. This was the gift of the class of 85. It cost $60,000, but it is a class gift, which means it's not officially the university itself. But Silent Sam, you'll see, is from the United Daughters of the Confederacy. But if you read the background, it was mostly paid for by university subscription. The Unsung Founders Monument was mostly paid for through university funds, even though it's a gift of the class of 2002. This one, I'm not sure how much the university kicked it, but this was a class gift. Absolutely impossible to miss. The basketball player was right there, and so, you know, at a time when a lot of black men might have been feeling kind of threatened by the whole Harvey Gantt thing and your place on the campus, your only being as, you know, and it's kind of relevant to today with the discussions, you know, a small number of black men on campus, and most are assumed to be here because they're athletes, even if you look at them and say, I wonder what they play. Right? I mean, it is an issue that's been going on for quite a while, and it's probably good that he's missing in terms of the discussion. But it is important to think how prominent this would have been. And of course, symbolically, as we talked about at the beginning, this is a site of black struggle and success. So to put something like that here is a little tricky. Also, I know some of you are from a class where you're talking about building names. The Daniels building is named after, of course, Josephus Daniels, who was just in the Ken Burns documentary about Roosevelt. But what's interesting is how rarely Daniels' relationship to white supremacy is discussed. Instead, you hear about him being ambassador to Mexico or, you know, those kind of things. But let's get to the graveyard.